So if you're comfortable, you'll just have to hit yes there, and everything should start. All right. So hello and welcome. I'm Helen Dulac, the Public Education Manager for the North Texas Municipal Water District. The North Texas Municipal Water District is a water, wastewater, and solid waste service provider. We provide water to 2 million people in 10 counties in North Texas. We are all thankful for the recent rains and the high chance of rain today and over the next few days. And one reason is because just last month, we were all experiencing drought-like conditions and record water demands, mainly due to outdoor watering. Each summer, water demands can go up by 50% because of the need for outdoor watering, and this summer was no exception. This is why NTMWD teamed up with Texas A&M AgriLife on this virtual class series to help you have a healthy landscape while using our most precious resource, water, wisely. As a thank you, we're having a native plant giveaway. And to be entered into the native plant giveaway, just please, if you are watching this live, send a message to me with your email address through the chat messenger. And more details about our native plant giveaway, it can be found on our website, ntmwd.com/classes. And if we have a minute afterwards, I'll share more information about that. This is the last session in our series and is being recorded. This and all the other sessions are posted on that same website, ntmwd.com/classes. And out of respect for our presenter, please keep your microphone muted. And if you want your video off to conserve bandwidth, our speaker is looking forward to answering your questions. So please type those into the chat. It is my pleasure to introduce Dean, who is an Extension Program Specialist 2 with the Urban Wish team. In his role, Dean combines his expertise in water conservation and passion for the environment to build sustainable extension programs that support the Texas A&M AgriLife mission by developing research-based, locally relevant, and beneficial programming to promote and protect the Texas's natural resources. Dean has close to 20 years of experience working with water conservation program development, management, and implementation with some of the most active organizations in Texas. We're very fortunate to have Dean with us here today, and I'll let him take it away.
All right. Thank you, Helen. Looks like you got lots of people chiming in wanting native plants. That's wonderful. That's wonderful after this this kind of little dry spell we've had, and now this kind of rain burst. You'll see all those native plants just doing what they do, just handling all this bizarre weather we get. So well, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here and spending your lunch break with me. I hope everybody's getting some good food, nourishment, or have already eaten some good food. But today we're going to talk about drip irrigation. So we're really just going to kind of talk about some basics. We'll kind of start off with a little bit of little weather, what's going on, and roll that into why we should be using drip irrigation. We're going to talk a little bit about some pros and cons of drip irrigation. And then we'll get into some of the components. What are the things that we actually need for a good drip irrigation system? We'll have some pictures of some various installations. And finally, we'll wrap the whole thing up with some tools and tips on how to actually schedule for your drip irrigation. So there's always a lot of questions around how much do I water, how long do I water, and there's really no good answer for that. So, but hopefully I'll provide you with some tools that will help out, okay? And like Helen said before, if you have questions, put them in the chat. I cannot talk and type at the same time, so I won't be able to answer them while I'm presenting, but we will get to them at the end of the program for sure. I usually try to leave a few minutes for some questions. So, and I also have a slide at the end of my contact information. So if you have questions, you can always reach out to me. And I might have kind of this little floating head thing here. So sometimes you might see my head move to one part of the screen to the other. I'll warn you before I do that because it's kind of weird, a little creepy sometimes. But okay, so snow shocker. We're in drought. We still are in drought conditions, although we did have some really nice rain, and hopefully we have some more rain on the way. It's a little gloomy out today, and temperatures are down, which is great. That means a lot less evaporation and transpiration from our plants, which means they don't need as much water right now. So hopefully we can kind of roll this sort of weather right into fall, because I'm looking forward to fall. I'm looking forward to breaking out my sweaters, and hopefully actually get to break out a sweater this year. Would be good. So anyway, I wanted to show you this this outlook. This is the U.S. drought monitor, and with the seasonal outlook, and you can see drought is pretty good here, pretty thick and hot throughout the southern and western part of the United States, or actually southwestern and western United States, and that is going to persist a little bit throughout the next year. But what does look good though is improvement. So last time I looked at this drought outlook, where we have kind of this grayish green beigey color over Texas, that was all brown. So now they're looking at possibly a little bit of improvement in drought conditions over the next couple of months, which is really good to see. This is the monitor from August 23rd. That is the latest one that we can get. The new one will be out this Thursday. Actually, it'll be the data will be collected Wednesday, and then the new map will be out Thursday. But still a good amount of Texas sitting in extreme and severe drought. We've seen some improvement in our area, mostly just kind of moderate to severe drought, which is good. And last year, we were looking pretty good. When you look at last year, the little map on the left there, some drought creeping in, which is to be expected during August and September. It's just very hot usually here this time of year. So but we're in a little bit more extreme conditions now. And our seasonal climate, or our seasonal outlook here for our temperature and our precipitation, this one goes through September, October, and November. So they're kind of looking forward, making some forecasts, and it does look like above normal temperatures for us over the next few months, and below normal precipitation. Right? We don't like to see that, but hopefully hopefully this map changes, and we get some more good soaking rains. But I just kind of want to point all of this out to you guys with respect to where we're sitting at is in the state of Texas with our reservoir levels, right? Like most everybody knows, hopefully everybody that's on the call knows that we don't have any natural really water in the state of Texas. We've got a few places that rely on underground aquifers, but those aquifers have to be recharged by rainfall. But mostly we get our water from reservoirs, right? And these are man-made structures and are filled up by rainfall in watersheds. And you can see in our area, in the North Texas area, we're looking pretty good as far as our levels go. But if you look other places around the state, they're not quite as fortunate. Some of those reservoirs are still dropping pretty low. So we just need to be mindful of where our water is being used and how our water is being used on a regular basis, because we only have so much in the reservoirs, right? And if we're looking at some below average rainfall and some above average temperatures, if we don't get good rainfall, we can still lose quite a bit of water throughout the fall and winter, and then end up going into summer next year already with some low reservoir. So, and that we don't want that, obviously, right? But with drip irrigation, most of the communities around the state, and especially in North Texas, will allow drip irrigation to be used on a regular basis. it's gallons per hour rather than gallons per minute. It's really, really low use. It's 95% efficient. And we'll talk about that here in a minute, but I just kind of pulled some of these little graphics off of the internet for some of the places around that are going into restrictions or asking people to reduce watering times a little more on their sprinklers. And when we're watering our typical lawns and grasses, we're using an overhead spray that's usually gallons per minute. So they use a lot of water. And when we go to drip, we're really using gallons per hour. So a really low amount of water. But also we're probably have drip in more of our plant beds and some of our other areas where we might have some more tender plants, some more plants that are need a little bit more water. Maybe we've got some annual color change out beds. Maybe we've got some other little annuals in there that we want to take care of. So it's good that we have that option of using drip in those areas. So with drought restrictions comes water waste violations. Everybody's on the lookout for water waste, and it really shouldn't be that way just during times of drought. It should be that way all the time. Because in the summer, as most of y'all probably know and have heard, at least 50%, I would say in some cases 60 to 70%, maybe even this last month, we were really dying for some water, and really for air conditioning and for watering our plants. It's pretty much when we're looking at 108, 109 degree days. I mean, that's all anybody wants, right? Is air conditioning and water. So demand was just outrageous. And a lot of that demand goes to watering lawns. The unfortunate reality is to it, that almost 50% of that water that we're using on our lawns is wasted due to overwatering or broken heads or just poor management on some of these systems. And that's again where drip comes in really handy. Is it's 95% efficient. When we talk about overhead spray irrigation, especially pop-up spray heads, if you get 40% efficiency, which really means 40% of the water that comes out of that sprinkler system is actually getting where it needs to get, and that's to the plant, that's pretty low. That's 40%, that's 60% inefficient if you really want to look at it that way. So but when we're at 95% efficiency, that's pretty good. That's where we want to be. That's a healthy use of our water. So why do we want to use it, right? We want to use it because we can. Hopefully we can use it more often to water our plant beds. Now, one of the things though with drip, and I will tell you, is not very good for a shallow rooting plant. So, and I think we'll talk about that again in a minute. So a shallow rooting plant is like turf grass. Turf grass, even though we try to encourage a 6 to 8 inch or deeper roots on that, it's still fairly shallow rooting compared to shrubs, trees, and some of our perennial plants that can have some pretty deep, extensive root systems. So, but really with drip, it's really efficient and it really delivers the water right where it needs to be. That's kind of the key. And if you are going for kind of a landscape where you've got just several plants around, but you're not totally covered with it, you've got some walkways maybe, or some rock beds, drip helps you just kind of put that water right on that plant and nowhere else. And that's what happens with a spray irrigation, is we tend to be watering everything, right? So we're trying to water that one plant, we're trying to water that one shrub, but really we're watering everything. And what else in the bed likes water and sun besides our plants? And that is weeds, right? That's an opportunity for weeds to germinate. So using drip more directly to the plants and not in our walkways or in our other areas That's going to save us from having to use chemicals to kill weeds or to have to pull weeds. So it's really handy in that situation. We can be really, really precise with it. So pros and cons, right? I'm sure, I'm going to have to move my head. Sorry, put it right there. Okay, so the pros, obviously, this list is quite a bit more extensive than the cons list, so I would say that's pretty good. When you're doing a pros and cons list, it's always good to have one of those outweigh the other one so you can make an informed decision. But some of the pros of it, right, is it saves water by minimizing evaporation. Okay, so with overhead irrigation or spray irrigation, there's a tendency to maybe lose some of that water just to evaporation, to heat, to wind drift. With drip, you're under the surface with drip. So you're right at the surface of the root. So we're really not looking at wind drift, and we're not really looking at a lot of evaporation in that case. We're putting very little amount of water directly where the plant is, so we're not really losing nutrients. Like if we're saturating the soil with sprinkler system, then we can lose some nutrients to runoff, to leaching, things like that. Drip irrigation is really, really good for any type of like odd, small, or irregular shaped garden. Now, most communities, I know some of the larger ones, they do have, and it is really a state law. I don't know if it's followed very much, but there really is not supposed to be overhead spray irrigation in anything less than 48 inches. So that is typically about the size of your little parkway strip, that strip of grass between your sidewalk and your curb. So a lot of the newer communities will have drip irrigation in that general area underneath that grass. But it's already set up, so it's perfect to pull that grass out and put a nice little native garden in there and do some nice little native plantings. It would look really good. You can get the moisture very evenly distributed, maintains a healthy soil for the plant by not oversaturating the soil. And the best thing is it's really versatile, right? So you can use it in potted plants, you can use it in vegetable gardens, you can use it almost anywhere, right? With relatively ease, and we'll get into all of that here in just a minute. So on the downside, right, it can be expensive to install, especially on a large scale. It's a lot of labor involved in it. There's a lot of moving pieces. Well, not really, nothing moves. There's a lot of small pieces, but it's just a lot of labor to install. There is some maintenance that should be done. So regular flushing should be done on the system, especially if you're using well water or any type of, like if you're using water from rainwater harvesting or rainwater collection, then you definitely want to flush that system out every once in a while, because we're talking these little tiny little emitters. So we do want to get any debris out that may get stuck in those emitters. The line is pretty soft. So one good jab with a sharpshooter shovel and you've cut a line or nicked a line, and now you've got a pretty good leak there. The good side though is it's easy to repair, right? So and it's not really good for shallow rooting plants. We already talked to that. Although there has been quite a bit of success with it with turf grass. It's really just has to do with appropriate installation and appropriate scheduling and timing for that. So that is always an option if that's something that you guys want to do. So the basic system, right, or design looks pretty much like this. Here, I'm going to move my head over here again in the corner. Right, so we have our water source, okay, which for most of us, it's going to be the meter if we're tapping into our automatic irrigation system. That water source could be your hose bib or a spigot or well pump or whatever you want to use. We're gonna probably need some kind of pressure regulator for it, because drip does use really, really low pressure, and our pressure coming off of our main line is pretty high. So we're gonna need some type of a pressure regulator, probably a filter. Never a bad idea to put a filter in. And then we're gonna have our headers and our laterals, just like a normal irrigation system. And I'll show you kind of how this looks in real world. So, but there are lots of options. There's lots of different ways to go with installing an irrigation system. So some of the basic components that we've got are here for, like, basically our point of connection, right? So where are we going to connect to? Are we going to connect to our standard irrigation system? Are we going to connect to our meter? Or are we going to convert our irrigation system? So if we're going to connect, right, this little valve here on the left of your screen, that is an all-in-one. That is a pressure regulator and an automatic irrigation valve and a filter for your drip system. So that is like a specific device for drip irrigation. It does everything all in one little unit, which is super handy. So it'll get the pressure down to like 15 PSI and has a nice filter in there for you. So you can clean that filter out every once in a while. The thing in the middle is, and the thing on the right are converters, basically, right? So that allows you to remove a pop-up spray head and install this device instead. With one of these two little tops on the end. I'll show you some pictures of this installed, so you can see, so you can convert a bed to drip irrigation. Pretty inexpensive device. I mean, maybe like 25, 30 bucks or something for this deal. And it works great. It also has a built-in pressure regulator, so you don't need to worry about the pressure on it. And there's different devices, different ways, right? So like the one in the middle is for like a 17 or half-inch line that you would use. More than likely you would use that with the line that has built-in emitters in it. You could use it with funny pipe or with some other pipe too, and I'll show you that. Or you can do something more involved with what they call spaghetti tubing, or the small tube. So if you have more like point source irrigation, right? So say you've got kind of like a little a vegetable garden, or maybe a cactus garden or something, and you really just want to deliver a little bit of water to those specific plants, then you would go with something a little more detailed, or your potted plants, right? So and I believe I have some slides on that too. All right, so here's a conversion kit. This is one that's in my backyard. You can see it's a little faded. It has weathered the storm nicely, but essentially you just replace one of your pop-ups and then cap the other ones in the zone. Traditionally, you can go about 100 to 150 feet with drip line on either side of this device. So that's pretty good distance. That's pretty long way on there. So you might not need the other heads, because your heads may be 10 or 12 feet apart. So you may not need those other heads. But if you do cap them off, make sure you put some kind of identifying something there so you know where the heads are. So if you ever want to convert it back, then you know where the heads are. You're not like, oh, I knew there was some heads here somewhere, I forgot. But it's real easy to install, real simple. As you can tell, it's just you just screw it all together and press it in, and you're good to go. Now the downside is it does stick up. You can go in and lower everything if you want, dig the hole a little bit deeper. But for me, this is fine. This is behind a shrub, so you don't really see it. And it's a good reminder that it's there, and I know when to check it. But a real easy conversion. And there's some great videos on the internet too on how to change those out. It's really pretty simple. If you're just somewhat handy, you should be able to do it. So if you want to use your hose bib, like say you've got a vegetable garden, you've got a small little native plant garden, you just have a small little area, or maybe you just want to water your potted plants with drip irrigation, you can set up on a hose bib. And here are two different examples here. We have one that's just a basic backflow device, and most faucets now, the newer ones, come with like a back siphonage device, just to keep water from going backwards into the city main. That's a whole another discussion of why we need that, but that is a state regulation to have a backflow or back siphonage device, and then a filter, and then your connections and your swivels that go right into your pipe. Pretty simple. If you want to add a timer or a splitter, you can certainly do that. You can get splitters that have little on-off valves, so you can turn them on and off. You can get all kinds of different timers. You can get Bluetooth timers where you can operate it from your phone. You can get just simple egg timer type of timers that you just turn the dial and let it run for a certain amount of time. But that would fit just right in there with everything else. You would just kind of put it between that filter and your hose bib. But having the splitter is great, because then you don't really need to disconnect your drip system. If you want to use your garden hose, you can just put your garden hose on the other side. And I've seen these splitters like go into 4 different directions. That's getting a little crazy looking sometimes, but it certainly can be done. So some of the components that you'll want to use for your drip is you'll obviously need line. Okay, so you'll need tubing, and 17 millimeter size, or I think ½ inch, I think it's pretty close to the same. That's pretty much what you're going to find out there. But there's so many different variations and so many different manufacturers making it, but they all work essentially the same way. Here I'm showing you that there's a 17 millimeter solid line, right? This has no emitters in it. So this would be really good for a space where you need to go, like maybe you're crossing over from one bed to another bed, right? So you'd want to use this solid line in there, so you're not using water or having emitters in an area where it's not necessary. You can punch holes in the 17 millimeter line with a punch, and you can add little spaghetti tubes onto it. You can use this line for a header, and then have tubing with drip emitters going off it. There's any number of things you can do with it. And then you've got the drip line with the built-in emitters. You can see the little black holes there. Those are the emitter devices, and those come in different sizes, and we'll talk about that. Different gallon per hour emitters with all kinds of different features that are available to you as a homeowner, or really just to anybody. I mean, all this stuff is so easily available. And then you've got your basic black poly type of pipe with your 1/4 inch spaghetti tubing on there. So that's a maximum of 17 gallons per hour on those spaghetti tubes. So you got to really be careful and make sure that you are regulated down if you're using that kind of stuff. But that's what you would use for your potted plants for sure, or for any place where you just have point source where you really just want that emitter right on that one particular plant. Tubing comes in mostly at 17 millimeters. There are some other applications of bigger tubing that are out there. It's mostly going to be for like really, really large properties or agriculture type of use. But for most of our home use, then we're going to stick with this 17 millimeter type of tube. That's what you're going to find pretty regularly. And at that size, you can find all kinds of different devices, all kinds of add-on features, all kinds of couplers, and whatever else you need. But you can get pretty good flow rate with this. So there's really no need to go over that 17 millimeter on your tubing. If you need to go like across a yard, maybe like your point of connection is in one spot and 50 feet away is where you want to run some tubing and then do drip irrigation, well, then I would say just run PVC pipe through that distance, and then connect into your your drip station there rather than trying to use 17 millimeter or funny pipe, because that's just too far of a run. Flex tubing, or funny pipe as it's called a lot in industry, is really just like a black kind of rubber flexible pipe. It's really good for moving sprinkler heads. It's really good for running about 20-25 feet in a yard, but not really much farther than that. So if you want to move ahead, you could certainly use funny pipe because it's easy to make the connections with it. But like I said, not really good for drip, just because it's really, really hard to poke holes in it, but good if you need to run a certain amount of distance before you start your drip system. So keep that in mind when you're looking at the various tubings that are out there. And they have some that are a little bit more plastic, like a polyvinyl, and some that are a little more rubbery, that are a little bit more flexible. And one of the things, though, like probably the best tip that I could give you folks, for anybody that's wanting to do their own drip installation, is lay all of your pipe out, all of your tubing out in the sun before you start dealing with it, or use like a little propane torch thing, so you can kind of heat it up, because when it's cold, it's hard and it is tough to put those fittings in on it. So definitely, if it's a warm day out with lots of sunshine, then just lay all that tubing out in the sun, let it get nice and hot. And when it gets hot, it'll get a little bit more pliable, and a lot easier to manage. So you'll definitely save yourself some headaches and some blisters on your hands for sure if you kind of warm up the pipe first. So we talked a little bit about the emitters in the drip line, but there's also micro irrigation that you can do, right? And I've mentioned this a couple of times with the spaghetti tubing. You can see that there's any number of different types of devices that you can use, from sprays to bubblers to drippers that drip different gallons per minute. You can see the picture on your top left there is just like a little emitter that's poked straight into some blank 17 millimeter tubing. You can see in the picture in the middle, got some kind of little poly pipe back there with an emitter junction poked into it, and a little spaghetti tubing going onto a stake. Let's see what's behind my head. Oh yeah, and then another kind of little spray irrigation. So you got lots of different types of spray options too for different types of watering situations. So all of this stuff is out there. It's available. You just need to kind of think about what you want to do. What is it you're trying to do? What is the application you want to get? And then just kind of start putting your system together. It's really easy. It's so low volume and low pressure that you're really hard to mess anything up, right? It all just usually comes together and works pretty nicely. So, which is always good. So it's nice when things work nicely and things behave the way they should behave. So let's talk about our application, right? So we want to use drip. We've kind of looked at our situation. We know exactly what it is we want to do. We know what we're watering. We know how we want to water it. Now we need to look at our soil, right? Because this is going to make a big difference on what we actually choose for parts, right? So clay soil, which not a lot of us have heavy clay soil, right? So, but with heavy clay soil, you're going to need those emitters closer together. You're going to maybe want even a higher output, because we're not going to move the sand or move the water out very easily, right? It's going to kind of just go straight down into the soil. It's not going to really move out very much. But with our clay soil, which is what most of us have, right, it's going to move out farther than it is going to move in. So we can go farther apart with our emitters. We can even go a little bit lower application rate with our emitters, just because clay soil can't really absorb a lot of water really fast anyway, so we want to put it on slow. But when it's getting onto the clay soil, it's going to move out. So we can certainly have that 1 foot or 18 inches, or maybe even 2 inches apart on our rows with our drip line, right? And we just have to watch how we water it to make sure we're getting that complete saturation between our rows, because we don't really, if we're watering some type of like turf grass or a ground cover or something like that, then we really don't want dry spots. And we want to make sure that we're saturating that soil pretty well. And then we're going to need a lot of connectors, right? So this is also going to depend on what you're doing and what your layout is. If you're going to do a grid pattern, right, where you want complete coverage, then you're going to need a lot of little T's and elbows, right? You're going to need tons of those things. If you're going from a space where you have some drip tubing with emitters in it, and then you're going to have a run of blank tubing into another bed that's got some emitters on it, then you're going to need some of these straight pieces to go ahead and put 2 pieces of pipe together. But you're also going to need a ton of those straight pieces there, those couplers for repairs. So keep a bunch of those on hand, like get just a pile of them and keep them on hand, especially if you're really active in your garden. There's no way you're gonna be able to avoid hitting a drip line. And if you're using the smaller spaghetti type of tubes, then there's all kinds of compression fittings with valves, with all kinds of other stuff that you can use too. So you just make sure that you're sizing it correctly. So if you know you're using 1/2 inch or 17 millimeter pipe, that you're getting your fittings to fit that. If you can use like with like, that's even better. So if you're using all Rainbird, try to use Rainbird fittings. If you're using Hunter, use Hunter fittings, and so on. But it's always better to kind of not mix those too much, because there's always little variations in size and the way they work. So again, having some different pieces on hand, lots of connectors and lots of couplers. Now you can do this one here on the left and the 2 that are in the middle. That's called a compression fitting. So it has like a little barb inside the coupler itself. So you basically just push the 2 pieces of hose together into this little coupler, and they kind of lock into place, right? So a little bit easier to do on the repair, but a little bit bigger, a little bit bulkier, and a little bit more expensive. Again, this is our 17 millimeter just inline coupler. If you nick the hose, right, you nick the line, then basically you just come in with your cutters and you just cut that little broken section out, put one of these little inline couplers in, squeeze it all back together, and you're good to go. You're on your way. All fixed and repaired and ready to water without too much trouble. And then here, these are 2 things that I think are just really a must for anybody. Now, one of the complaints that we hear with drip irrigation is that you don't see it working, right? It's subsurface, it's under the ground, it's under the mulch, so you don't really know when it's working. Well, this little device here on the left called a indicator will let you know when it's running, when it's working. It just takes a little bit of pressure to push this up, and a little bit of water will come out of the top of it. That tells you that this system is working, right? It tells you that everything is going through, and you put this at the end of your station or your zone, so you know water is moving completely through the whole entire system. You can put multiples of these on. They come in different forms. You can get like this one with the yellow head that pops up, or you can get some that have just like a little flag that pops up, whatever you want. But this is a really good way to let you know that your system's working, everything is working fine. This other one here is just a simple flush. It's just a simple flush valve. And this is just a little threaded inline 17 millimeter coupler that presses into the hose with a little PVC pipe cap on it. And that's it. And every once in a while, you just want to open that little PVC pipe up, turn on the system, and just run it for just a minute and just flush all the water out of it. Flush any debris that's getting in there. That'll help kind of keep your system clean and working good. Now, I understand this is not accessible to everybody, but if you're putting in your system, especially in a plant bed, make sure that you put in some kind of little flush valve and, you know, put a rock or do something next to where that little flush valve cap is, so you don't lose it and you don't forget where it is, right? Because that can happen. You get covered over by mulch pretty easy, but you want to just be sure that you know where that is. And then when you're installing, you're going to need stakes, and you're going to need lots of them. So if you think you need 100 stakes, order 200 stakes, right? Because you will certainly use more than what you want, because you really want to keep the line down. You want to keep it underneath the mulch. You want to keep it close to the soil. You want to keep it down low, close to where the plants can get to it. And these stakes are going to help. The stakes, if you don't have a lot of stakes on it, eventually the pipe will push up through the mulch, and you'll have to kind of dig it away and push it down, stake it, and cover it back up. But if we go ahead and stake it down really nice and cleanly to begin with, then we don't really have to worry too much about it. But definitely get lots of stakes is way more than what you think you're going to need. And because any place where you have like a junction too, where you have like a T or an angle, you'll want to put a couple of stakes there, because the pipe will kind of flex and bend a little more where those angles are. And then you'll want to get these two tools for sure. Both of these are Rainbird. I'm not really toting any one particular product or another. These are just the pictures that popped up on the internet. And the one on the left there is a cutter. So that will cut your poly tubing and your spaghetti tubing. So that little smaller one there closer to the blade, that's for your small 1/4 inch spaghetti tubing. Cuts it real easy, real clean, and straight, right? Because it's got like a little flat surface. So whenever you're cutting that tubing, you want as flush of a cut as you can get to make sure when you press the fitting in, you're getting a nice seal with it. The one here on the right is like a little hole punch. So essentially, you're just looking at punching a hole in the vinyl piping to put a spaghetti tube in it, or an emitter, or something along those lines. So that will certainly, this little guy here works kind of like a stapler, I guess, or a hole punch will save you a lot of trouble than trying to use an awl or kitchen knife or some other type of tool. Just definitely get the right tool for the right job, and you will be so much happier with yourself. So, all right, so here's some installation photos that we've got here. I just grabbed these off the internet. So you can see here, this one on the left is like a vegetable garden. They've got some point source emitters and some spaghetti tubing going through there. The one on the top in the middle is like a little spray. So you'd want to use that if you have like a little ground cover area, or you want to just saturate the area a little bit more. Again, more spaghetti tubing with some little emitters on the end, right? Just feeding some little plants very specifically. And then in the bottom, this is the 17 millimeter, the regular poly type that there's so many different brands that make this, but this will eventually just kind of be more of a soil soaker. You'll want to soak this whole entire bed. And this will probably all be covered over with mulch for sure. A couple of other installations here. You've got like a little corner bed on the top left there. You can see they've kind of gridded that up a little bit. Got some straight runs to really saturate that soil, water it good. The one behind my head here, that looks like that's going to be set up for turf grass. So they're going to install some turf grass underneath there. You can see those rows are probably about 12 inches apart, 12-inch spacing on the emitters. Really looking to saturate that whole entire area. And then a little more free form on the one on the bottom right, where we're trying to get some of the plants watered, but maybe we don't want to saturate the whole entire bed. Here's a garden application for a large garden. This is Dr. Masabni's garden at the Dallas Center. And you can see what he's done here is he has PVC pipe headers with a valve on each one, so he can turn on and off whatever bed he wants to water, and which ones he does not want to water. And he can move these tubes out of the way and his line out of the way. He can as he needs for whatever he's planting, but keeps it nice, keeps it neat and clean, and keeps the rows in between from getting saturated. So you get some nice weed-free watering going on there. Really, really handy to do this type of setup. And you can use it for trees. So, and it's actually way better for trees than it is your bubblers, because we're really getting more watering and we're getting better saturation at the root zone, which is where we need it for trees, especially out towards the drip line, right? So trees don't take water right at the trunk, except for when they're just little trees, when they're first planted, little saplings. As they grow and get bigger, their root zones obviously expand out beyond the canopy. So we want to get to that, what they call the drip line, right? So the drip line of the tree is right at the edge of the canopy. We want to be within 12 to 18 inches of that little drip sign. That's going to be the most effective place for a tree to take up watering that. And with drip tubing, you can always move it out farther and farther and farther. You can add to it. You don't have to have it at the middle all the time. You can always remove and add rows to it and grow it as much as you need to. Now, of course, when the trees get a little bit older, get a little bit more mature, then you may, and the lines get longer and bigger, then you're going to have to run it for a little bit longer of a period of time. So with that, let's talk about scheduling a little bit. Let's talk about how much we're using with our drip irrigation. So here's a couple of things that I just pulled together. This one's from Rainbird. Essentially, what this is telling you is how many inches per hour you're using with your different emitter spacing. So the first column there, 0.6 gallon per hour emitter, right? If you have your lateral row spacing at 12 inches and you have your emitter spacing at 12 inches, right? You're going to be right at about 1 inch per hour for watering. So for most of our plant beds that we have, we probably cut that in half. Probably 1 inch per hour is too much. So you might do a 30-minute run. You may break that up to 2 days a week, do a 15-minute run on each day. But this is kind of a little quick guide to let you know, kind of help you with your scheduling a little bit. If you have a 9 gallon per hour emitter, same thing, 12 by 12 spacing, you're looking at almost 1.5 inches of inches per hour of water, right? That's pretty excessive. That gets pretty good there. So again, you probably don't need that full hour unless you're really watering some water intensive types of plants. Here's another one from Penn State that I grabbed. This is the same thing. You can pretty much assume, right, that when they say low flow, they're looking at probably 0.4 gallons per minute, and then a medium flow probably around 0.6, and a high flow 0.9 or 1 gallon per hour on that flow. And so this is just kind of showing you a little bit of what our flow rate is in gallons per hour, and then to gallons per minute, and then how long it runs to get to that 1 inch of water on these different emitters. And you can see with the high flow, just you can get there pretty quick. So you can get in a couple hours, you can definitely get 1 inch of water pretty fast. So and again, 1 inch may be a little bit excessive, but the tendency is to overrun drip irrigation because it comes out so slow. So we really want to be careful with that. and not saturate the soil. Because if the soil is saturated, what happens, right? It compresses all the oxygen, the air out of the soil. And if there's no air or oxygen in the soil, then the plants cannot take up the water that they need. So they'll end up dying. And it looks really similar to drought stress as it does water stress. So we definitely want to do some trial and error and make sure that we're checking on our soil to see where we're at. You can go to this website right here. This is Washington State University. They have this pretty handy little calculator here. So you can put in your emitter flow rate, your distance between your emitters and your rows, and click calculate. It'll give you inches per hour. And then if you want gallons per minute, then you just divide that by 60, and that's going to give you gallons per minute. So we're kind of at the same thing we looked at before with the rainbird thing. We're at 0.96 gallons per minute. You can see behind my head there. So right at about an inch. So let me move my head again. I keep just getting in everybody's way with my head. So if you have your precipitation rate and then you want to figure out how to schedule your irrigation controller, well, here is a calculation you can do. It's really simple. It's called a runtime calculator. So with this example, we have our water requirement, or what we want to do is we want to add 1/2 inch of water per week, right? So we're going to do 0.5. If you want to do more, that number, lower that number. We know our precipitation rate, right? So our application rate, which we found in our charts, is 0.96. So we'll just do this little calculation. So, and we'll go at 60 because we're trying to do for 60 minutes, right? So we run the calculation and we get 31.25 minutes per week to get 1/2 inch with our particular setup. So we're gonna probably go twice per week. So we're gonna divide that in half. So we're gonna round up to 16 minutes per day. And then I'm going to, as I always do, I'm gonna advise that we do a cycle and soak. So we put a little bit of water on, we let it soak in for a while, and then we put some more on using our run times. Did some programs here in the past where we really got into cycle and soak and how to set that up. So you can go back and look at those. So we're going to really break it down to pretty much 4 8-minute cycles for the whole entire week. So 2 8-minute cycles per day, twice per week on that. So I hope that helps you guys with the scheduling on that. And then drip is going to work best when it's close to the soil surface, close to the roots. If you lay the drip on top of the mulch and you're using a 2 or 3 inch layer of mulch, that's a long way for those little droplets to travel down to get to the soil. We're going to lose some to heat. We're going to lose some to evaporation. So you're going to end up having to run the system a lot longer if it's on top of the mulch, and we're going to end up wasting water in that situation. So we're not efficiently using the drip the way it is intended to use. So let's make sure we install it on the surface, soil surface, and covered over with mulch. I threw this little card in here that I always keep around. This is just some great calculations and some conversions on how much mulch to buy, right? So if you know how big of a bed you need, you can look at this and you know, oh, well, I need to get 25 bags of mulch to achieve a 3 inch depth, or I need 2 bags of mulch to get a 1/2 inch depth, right? So this is really handy, helps you not overbuy or underbuy on your mulch. So take a snapshot of that. If you don't have that already, keep that handy. That is a really, really handy tool. So you don't have to make extra trips or end up with a bunch of extra mulch. And that's it for me. Finished up. Hopefully I have some time for some questions. I see a lot of activity going on in the chat there. So yeah,
All right.
so let's get into it.
All right, Dean, you have a ton of questions. So this is fantastic. Okay, so
speed round.
Yeah. All right. So Karen asked a really good question. How is a drip line tube different than a soaker hose?
Okay, so a drip line has little emitters that are spaced farther apart, generally about 1 foot apart. And that's the only place water comes out, are those little emitters. Now with a soaker hose, the whole thing gets saturated. The whole thing sweats basically, but you only get about 100 feet on a soaker hose. Anything beyond 100 feet, you start losing pressure, right? And you start losing efficiency. With a drip line, you can go about 200 feet with the drip line, and you can usually do that 200 feet from either direction of your point of connection. So you can get a lot more distance with your drip line. Plus, you can customize it a little more than you can with your soaker hose.
All right.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah. So Jim asked, is there a good method to unclog emitters?
You can blow air through the line if you want to try to unclog them. If you know which one is clogged in particular, you could maybe try and use a little paper clip to try to clean it out. But probably the best thing to do is just cut that clogged. If it's just one clogged emitter out, just cut it out, cut that section out and add a new section with some little inline couplers.
Okay. And so this kind of goes along with it. And you touched on it a little bit, but about flushing your irrigation hoses. So you did talk about how you can add that little piece where you can flush. Is that the best way to do it, or are there other ways to flush your lines?
I think that's really the best way to do it. That's the simplest, because you just take the cap off and you turn it on and you let it run. Now you can buy fancy automatic flush valves that will flush the system out whenever it turns off. You can get tubing that has emitters that, well, that just escapes me what the name is, but check valve emitters that won't allow water to leak out of the emitters and keeps water in the line. I mean, there's so many different devices you can get. It just depends on how fancy you want to get. If you want to be low tech like me, just that little purge valve works great. And I don't even do it that often, once a year, maybe at the most, just to flush it out. Or if I'm thinking it's not working appropriately, then I'll just flush it out real quick, just about a minute time. That's all.
Okay. So this question is a little bit different. Karen was asking if drip irrigation is good to water your house foundation.
Okay, well, that's what most companies install when they do a drip or a foundation watering system. They will use drip irrigation. Is it good? I don't know. I'm not a structural engineer, so I really don't know exactly the fine details of that, but that is generally what is used for foundation. Yeah.
Okay, and I just want to let everybody know, we understand if you need to leave at 1 o'clock. This session is being recorded, so all of the questions I've received, I will ask the dean, and he'll do his best to answer. And the recording will be posted at ntmwd.com/classes, so you can come back and refer to it and get all of the Q&A. All right, so we're going to keep on trucking because there's a lot of questions. All right, so Jay asked, since installation might be expensive, what do you need to keep in mind to install your system in stages? For example, set it up so that we could add on to each stage. And if you do that, what would you do first, second, and third?
Okay. So true extension answer is it depends. So you can only go so far with your drip line before you're going to exceed its limits. So if you're doing conversions and you're just converting different spray heads that you had or irrigation heads, then make sure you cap those off and you know where they are, and you sort of lay out your system based on using a converter from each of those heads and just sort of build it out that way. You can always add on, right? It's to add on is just the simple cut and put a T in or a coupler in and go to the next set of line. But if you keep doing that too much, you're not going to have enough distance. So at some point, you're going to have another water source to get to the next zone or the next station. So you definitely want to hydrozone it and break it up into stations if you can get away with that.
Oh, okay. I didn't think about that. All right. Julie asked, can you set up on a hose bib that has freeze protection on it?
Well, yes and no, I guess. So traditionally for freeze protection, we just tell everybody to unhook everything and put one of those little foam covers over your hose bib. And I would assume that's probably your best bet. Now, if you wanted to build something or come up with something that was similar to that you could cover the whole unit with, in the cold weather, then I suppose you could attempt to do that. It wouldn't be a whole lot different than trying to insulate your pool pump or your pool filter or that kind of stuff. But in the wintertime, unless you've got a vegetable garden where you're growing crops over winter, generally we're probably going to be running that system manually or hand watering anyway in the winter. So I don't know if I would worry too much about that in the wintertime, but probably the best bet's disconnect it all, especially if there's a chance for a freeze.
All right. Good advice. All right. So Lady asked, when you convert a pop-up sprinkler head to a drip station, does the drip station simply operate when the sprinkler is operating?
Yes, correct. So another thing to be careful of is mixing devices. Okay, so if you have, say you have 10 spray heads, right? And 5 of them are spraying in a plant bed and 5 of them are spraying in grass. If you want to convert that zone to drip, right, but only the 5 that are in the plant bed, then you're still always going to have the 5 that are spraying in the grass, right? So there's no way to really isolate that one particular head from all 10, right? You can cap the others if you want. It's going to put a lot of pressure through it, so you want to be careful of that. But you can, you're just going to have to sort of think about it methodically. And if you're going to end up mixing spray heads with your drip in your plant beds, just remember that there's a good chance something is going to get overwatered or something is going to get underwatered, because again, we're looking at gallons per minute with our spray heads and gallons per hour with our drip zone. So it's a fine balance. I'm not saying it can't be done. Just it's probably not the best thing to do. So just keep that in mind.
All right. And we had Robert ask, do you recommend placing the drip system under the mulch, or is it okay to place it above the mulch? And so I think you answered that it should go below the mulch.
Right. Yeah, definitely below the mulch.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so then April had a good question. She goes, but if your tubing is under the mulch, what happens if you step on it?
Right. Well, most of the tubing is pretty hard enough to where it's not going to get crimped or flattened out if you're stepping on it when it's under the mulch. There's going to be enough cushion there. And the little emitters are hard plastic, so you're not really going to break those and crack them. So you really don't have to worry too much about that. I think it would be fine, unless you're playing football or like really standing on it or trying to park vehicles on it. Then now we've got a problem. But if you're just stepping into your plant bed to work on your plants, trim your plants, or just typical garden activities, then I don't think there's a worry at all.
Okay, good. Note to self, no rugby tournaments on drip irrigation tubing.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
All right. So Stephen had a really good tip he wanted to share.
Yeah.
He was told by a structural engineer and irrigation people to set up a separate drip irrigation zone specifically for foundations. And so that's what he's done.
Yeah, if you're going to have a drip zone just for foundation watering, that certainly needs to be on its own separate zone. You don't want to mix your foundation with watering with your plants, basically, just because the needs are going to be different, right? And the runtime is just going to be different. So yeah, you definitely would like to have a separate zone for that.
All right. And so we have a question about sidewalks. Is there an easy way to go under sidewalks? And when you are working with sidewalks, should you use that non-perforated hose?
Okay, so no, there is no easy way to go under sidewalks, other than digging. And now I've seen like where they've dug it out and they've used the PVC pipe and a garden hose and created kind of like a little pressure washer and kind of blown a tunnel underneath the sidewalk. The best thing to do is, if you're going to go under the sidewalk, dig it out and put a PVC pipe sleeve under there, and then run the tubing through the PVC pipe. So this way, if you ever need to pull it out for a repair, then you can do that, right? You're not covering it back up with soil. And yes, you want to use blank tubing when you go underneath the sidewalk. You don't really need to water underneath the sidewalk for any reason. So you'd want to use blank tubing without emitters on it.
All right. So we're down to our last two questions.
Okay.
All right. So WCAST, it wants to plant salad greens and carrots in a bed near the foundation of their house.
Okay.
Would it be smarter to use the spaghetti soaker hose for that area?
So okay, maybe, right? One of the hazards to doing the spaghetti type of tubing is going to be critters can really eat through it pretty quickly. So you may have to just keep an eye on it and be vigilant about it. You can do a soaker hose through there. It depends on how many plants you're planting. Okay, so if you're going to have like a row of like 2 rows of like 10 plants each, then I would recommend using some poly tubing with drip emitters on it, rather than a single point source emitter for each particular plant. That's going to be a lot to manage. Or if you can use a soaker hose, you can wind a soaker hose through it as well.
Oh, okay. All right. Our last question comes from Janine. Should you and how would you winterize your drip irrigation system?
I don't know how much I would worry about winterizing it. Now, if it's an extensive system that's like underneath your whole entire lawn, then maybe you'd want to winterize it. And basically you would need to have a flush valve on it, and you would open that flush valve and you would let all of the water run out of it as much as you can. So you would turn it on, you would flush it out, and then you turn the system out and you off, and then you would let everything run out at the lowest point. So basically gravity is going to carry all the water out of it. If it's just a small drip system that's in a garden bed underneath the mulch, I wouldn't worry too much about winterizing it, because that hose is slightly flexible. So if it does happen to freeze a little bit in there, I think it's going to be okay. We don't, outside of our kind of anomaly, sorry, something just poked me in the eye, outside of our freeze anomaly we had recently, we really don't get that long of sustained freezes. If the hose is under a good 3-inch blanket of mulch, then I think it's going to be okay. It should stay pretty warm, or at least warm enough underneath there.
All right, good to know. I didn't realize that. All right, everybody, I want to thank you so much for attending today. I want to thank you for the fantastic questions that we had. I want to thank Dean for sharing his time and expertise with us. And just lastly, this is the last class in our series. We have been Dean and I were actually just discussing about maybe trying to do another series this fall that would include fall gardening and winterizing a standard automatic irrigation system and some other things like that. If there are certain topics you'd like to see, feel free to email me. I sent out a reminder emails the other night, so you can respond to those. And also just to explain the native plant giveaway. Every class that you attended during this series, that you attended live during the series and shared your email address with me, I'm putting all those email addresses basically in a pot, and I'm going to randomly select 2 to 4 winners. Those winners will get about 3 or 4 native plants each. It depends how many of them I kept alive over this brutal summer. And then those plants will be ready for pickup at 501 East Wiley. I'm sorry, 501 East Brown Street in Wiley, Texas. Unfortunately, you will have to come and pick up your plants. And that will be done after Labor Day. So the drawing will probably be held the day after Labor Day. I will reach out to you through your email address and organize a time for you to pick up your native plants. And so that is our way to say thank you for participating in our series. And so Heather just dropped a message in the chat. She'd love to see more information on drip for vegetable beds. She set up a system and she wants to know if she did the best thing possible. So I might know somebody who could talk about that in a future series. So Heather, thank you so much for that. And thank you, Dean, for being here. And you're getting lots and lots of kudos into the chat. So
Excellent.
I'm going to leave it up for just a sec. So if anybody else wants to send me their email address for the plant giveaway, they can. And again, thank you all for being here.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Have a great day.